All right, so at this point, guys, we don't really need the analysis. So we're kind of doing more of just a Rhino exercise at this point. So my suggestion would be to go into Grasshopper and just turn the things off that are going to make it run slower. And additionally, I would actually turn off the visibility of some of this other stuff. So like these two, we can turn those off, and then we're pretty much back into Rhino mode. Yeah, I turned the toggle off, and then I selected this, and I did a middle mouse click, and I turned them off. And for this video here, I'm just going to minimize Grasshopper. So it's still there, but it's minimized. All right, so I don't want to go too much into the Rhino side of this, but I feel like part of it is going to be necessary. We'll talk a little bit about the sun angle. So I mentioned that the sun angle is, or the direction of the sun rather, is coming in from the south, right? So basically down here, it's going along the y-axis, right, the green axis, from the south side. So if we're trying to measure the angle, the altitude of the sun around noon, which direction does it make sense to cut a section? North, south, or east, west? North to south, right? Because if you go east, west, the sun angle or the sun direction is the same way that you're facing, so you can't even see it technically if you were to analyze it. So you want to cut in the north-south direction so that when you view it from the side over here, you're going to see that the sun is coming down this way or the other way. It doesn't matter which way you cut it, you know. So I'm choosing to cut it in the direction where I'm going to see information behind. So that means I'm going to cut it. So I cut it around here. I'm going to look that way so that I can see this in the background. Basically, very close to the same direction that my perspective is in currently. The other thing I'm going to do is try to cut it at an interesting location, right? Cutting a section is really not just, it's not like you just drop a line somewhere and it is what it is. We choose the location of a section to show building features. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Are you guys already well practiced in that? Sort of, kind of. So for me, this building has a very significant feature in the north. If I were to cut through the north-south direction, what significant feature do you think that is? Huh? Beams, yeah, sort of. But more significantly, I think it's that gap. Right? This gap that's happening. So when I cut it through the north-south direction, we're going to get sunlight. We're going to see the analysis of the sunlight into the space from the side. But if I cut it in a place where it's going to cut through that gap, I'm also going to see sunlight coming through in the middle of the space. So that's an important feature, I would say. Making sense? And then additionally, if I step back even further from there, the other interesting part here is back here. So if I was to cut through this side, I'm pretty much going to have building all the way up to the wall. But if I cut through the middle, for the sake of the video, if I cut through if that side, the building goes all the way up to the roof, rather goes all the way up to the wall. It's kind of interesting, but it's not super interesting. But if I cut through the middle here, then I have another gap that happens at the wall. So I'll be able to see how much of the sunlight is actually washing down the wall in that space. Right, so that cut, I think, is a very interesting cut. Would you agree? You don't have to agree. You can disagree. So that's where I'm going to cut it. And so in this particular exercise, I'm going to just do it the easy way. So I can do that with a clipping plane. So you guys have heard of clipping planes before, right? Okay. So I need to set one of my side views to match the direction that I'm going to drop my clipping plane in. Or I don't need to, I could do it different ways, but I'm going to use my right side view and I'm going to switch it to a left side view so that I'm not looking at it over here, I'm actually looking at it from over here. So right click on the view and I'm going to set view to left. Depending on which way you oriented the building, it might not be the same for you. I think most of you are matching me here, so you'll do the same thing that I'm doing. Okay. So now this is going to match my view, and I have to point out that the important thing about building sections is that you don't ignore the background. The background is incredibly important, and we're going to talk about the graphics of the background on Thursday, but you've got to pick a view that has something in the background to show the context. Anyway, so those are the 2 points that you have to make in the export process for sections as well. You have to export the actual cut, and you have to export the background. Those are the 2 points, components you need. So up here I can, or sorry, in the left-hand view I can type in clipping plane. It doesn't really matter what layer or location you put it in, but just draw a little box somewhere. I usually put it off to the side so that it doesn't interfere with the model itself. Yes?
Put the clipping plane on front, or where do you put in which, like, view?
Here.
On the left?
Yeah. So now that my clipping plane's in, it's still in a location that isn't cutting anything, because if you look at it in perspective, the square with the X in it is the plane of the cut. The line is the direction that the camera looks, or the direction that the cut will be looking with the retaining remainder geometry. Sorry, it's a terrible way of explaining it. But anyway, as I pull this across, you're going to see, oh, I need to turn it on, sorry. Go to Properties, select it first, go to Properties, and then go to the clipping plane button up here. And you're going to see a couple of checkboxes. The checkboxes are which views are showing the cut. So the ones for me that are most important would be the left-hand view, because that's where I'm going to do my Make 2Ds to export the line work. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then the other one would be perspective, because I want to just kind of visually see what it looks like. Why isn't that showing my cut line? Huh? It's supposed to show the cut line. Oh, there it is. All right. So now, in perspective, it's easier to see. I can look at my model like this, and I can drag it back and forth across the building and look at the cut that it's making. So that'll help me really analyze where the interesting cuts are going to be. I think, this is fairly interesting because I have the gap in the roof. I think this is very interesting because I have the gap in the roof and I have the gap against the wall. And this could even be interesting because I have, sort of a double tier roof system. I can pull it even further back and then I only have that, but it's still got a gap against the wall. So you just need to pick a space to cut. I think for me, I am going to cut right here. So once you find your cut spot, you don't want to move the clipping plane. Be very, very careful about not moving the clipping plane. In fact, if you wanted to, you could switch off to another layer, one that you're going to use for export line work, and you can lock that layer. And I would suggest that you do. All right, so up to this point, what questions do you have? Okay, I'm going to stop this video and I'll capture the rest of the export process in the next.